What I was going to do for you originally, it occurred to me because the post sale coming up and because some of the extraordinary collection in a short period of time, that I would put together and show all of you, because you were interested in U.S. gold coins, that at one period of time from 41 to 46, you could have purchased every variety of every denomination of every U.S. gold coin, every gold pattern, and every gold-related and territorial piece because of the convergence of public and private transactions. I did that for about a day, and I got so bored I couldn't stand it anymore. So I just decided, you can do it, and now you know that, so that's over. Instead, I decided, as I was looking at some of the pedigrees in Poe, I saw a name, and it's not a name that many of you would recognize unless you've been dealers for a while. His name was George W. Rogers, and everybody called him Hank. Nobody even knew his name was George W. He lived in Midwest City, Oklahoma, and he was the kind of coin dealer that there are either very few or none of today. He was a guy that would be more than a vest pocket dealer, but a guy that operated out of his house. And the one thing that you would always see in common if you went to one of his tables at a show is that everything in it would be of extraordinary quality. He had an astonishing eye. And he put together what would not be then expensive coins, what would be bust and liberty seated and pieces that weren't big budget even for then, but whatever it was astonishingly nice. One day I was sitting next to him at an A&A show, and a gentleman purchased from him an earlier coin that probably cost $1,000 or so, which back then was way more money. And he walked away, and Hank looks at me and says, you know, if somebody buys a nice coin, I think they deserve a story that goes along with it. And when I remembered that, I decided that's what I'd like to do for you. I'm going to go through from 1s to 50s, and I'm going to tell you a story about what is my favorite piece in each of those denominations and the story behind it and why. It won't always be the highest grade piece, it won't always be the rarest piece, but it will be what I think is the most interesting piece. And what made me decide to do that was watching a rerun of The Way We Were. There's a scene in it where they're out in the water on a boat and they're playing a game. Best movie, best sandwich, best place to visit. Well, I'm going to do it, starting with 1s and going to 50s. The $1 gold pieces are a little bit of a chore because, as you know, it's a series that is historically collected. It's a series that has some really nice pieces, but it's not a series that has the same kind of rarities that are well known. The rarest piece in it was the one I started to pick because the 1849 Open Reef Charlotte is one of the rarest gold coins that has some of the least publicity there is. Very few people that are average collectors even know it exists, and many more sophisticated collectors have never seen one. They're either 4 or 5, depending upon who you listen to. The reason I started to pick that is I was back in Lafayette, Louisiana. I'd been practicing law in New Orleans, and I got a call to go look at a coin collection in New Orleans to see if I was interested. So I go to this house. It's right off of where the trolley line is on St. Charles Avenue. I walk in there, and on the table is a plastic board about this big, like the old Capitol plastic, and in it was a complete collection of $1 gold pieces. And up in the corner, since 49 was the first date, I looked down, and there was a 49 Open Reef Charlotte. I'd never seen one, and I knew they existed, so I had to turn the whole board around each time I wanted to see an obverse or a reverse. Years later, there was a discovery, just a couple of years later, a discovery of a 49 Open Reef C, and it ended up selling for what was a lot of money then. Ultimately, the piece brought over $1 million many years ago. That, however, got supplanted by another favorite of mine because I also remembered Lester Merkin showing me the 1854 proof that he and I were both convinced had come from the breaking up of the City of Bremen set. The 54 proof was so incredible a fabric that it looked like it was made in the 1880s. It was just brilliant and flashing, extraordinary piece. And then I rejected that because I told you everything that I could tell you about it. You already know the rest. And JD could tell you infinitely about the die, I'm sure. And then I picked what is more of a story. There's a clipping in there of the Dr. Judd collection. A book was written by Abe Kosoff that he called An Illustrated History of United States Coins. I think it's 439 if I remember right. They're done by numbers because he was going to sell the pieces. So it's not like a usual book. But 439 is a one-sentence description of a $1 gold piece. And the coin he's referring to is the 1872 Amazonian 1. It is a unique piece that belongs in a unique set. But the story behind it is even more interesting because it's a separation of the set and a battle of two collectors. Originally, the set, of course, was intact. The set was even known and talked about in the 1880s. And then all of a sudden you have a gap in time. You're not really sure where it was and where it belonged, but it reappears. And then when it reappears, it is ultimately acquired by the gentleman whose collection, when it was sold, was referred to as the world's greatest collection, Fred Boyd. So Fred Boyd now has this set. Well, Abe Kosoff, being Abe Kosoff, worked around forever trying to figure out how to get the Boyd set, and then he really wanted to get it during the war years because he had a customer for anything rare, King Farouk. King Farouk was buying whatever was extraordinary, nice, great. So Abe ends up somehow acquiring the entire pattern collection that Fred Boyd had. Among them was the set. But in the King Farouk acquisitions and in the King Farouk sales, you could get direct permission if something was under $10,000. So everything Abe did was put packets together at $9,900. So they would fall directly under the $10,000 limit and he could get paid faster. But Abe, being Abe and a pretty shrewd businessman, realized that King Farouk really wouldn't know how many pieces were in the set. And he had a customer who had every gold dollar except one. And his name was Dr. Judd, and he was writing a book about patterns. So he contacts Dr. Judd. He ends up giving Farouk everything but the one and putting a $9,900 tag on it and sending the one over to Dr. Judd, which Dr. Judd then had the only complete set there ever had been of the $1 pieces. But of course, now the set was split up. We'll jump ahead to the famous Palace sale in Cairo. Palace sale in Cairo was a frightening thing to attend because you had a whole lot of folks who wanted to go and were terrified about going in the mid-1950s to Cairo, Egypt. One gentleman mortgaged his house and decided that he would go there and buy pieces he may never see again. You know him as John Pittman, and he had a pretty good coin collection thereafter. Some others were dealers who got together and split the lots up because they didn't want to take each other on. One of the coins that is going to be sold out of the post sale, the 94 the dollars, and there's some of the 95s in there. A lot of those pieces, they simply sat there and said, look, we're not going to kill each other on this. Well, Dr. Wilkerson in Tennessee used Abe Kosoff to buy the 2.5, the 3, the 5, the 10, and the 20 that were the so-called Amazonian set. The one, of course, he knew his friend and competitor in patterns, he knew Dr. Judd owned the one. To give you an idea of prices in their comparison, the 5 pieces, without the 6th, without the dollar, brought 2.5 times what the Indian Head 20 brought. So you had the Indian Head 20 there at about $3,300. You had this partial set at almost $7,000. Kosoff comes back. He's got almost the set. Wilkerson takes the set. He's very happy. And now he's got to figure out how to do the $1 piece. Abe also knew and was friends with Dr. Judd. By the way, I knew Dr. Judd. And I asked Dr. Judd about what happened. And Dr. Judd told me that he had indeed spoken to Dr. Wilkerson. And Dr. Wilson said, if you ever sell this piece, I'd like to know about it. But he had decided to dispose of his entire collection. And he knew that Dr. Wilkerson didn't want the entire collection of both the regular issues and the patterns. So he simply made an agreement to sell everything to Abe. Abe turned around and contacted Dr. Wilkerson saying, I have a really nice $1 gold piece that you might have an interest in. He ends up negotiating a deal with Dr. Wilkerson where in order to get the one, he gets Dr. Wilkerson to buy the 20 other gold patterns, put the whole deal together as 21 pieces of gold patterns, and he traded with him. And by the way, I just spoke to Dr. Wilson's son to verify this the other night because I was curious. A set that was almost complete, lacking 6 pieces, of every denomination of every U.S. proof gold coin from 1858 to 1899, missing only half a dozen pieces, and that was the trade for the 21 pieces that came out. So when you're now looking at comparative investment, you're going, oh my God, look at the amount of money that those patterns actually cost and what they brought. The set, of course, then was reunited. You'll know the rest of the story because it ends up in a sale in 1990. It is now in a place that's probably going to be hanging around for a while. But the $1 piece was finally reunited with his friends, and that's why I picked it. I like that. The quarter eagle. Quarter eagle's a tie. Everybody knows about the 1841 and the little princess designation it had over the years, and a whole lot of people like the cow coins, and there are a lot of people like John Danruther who knows about obscure die varieties, one of which in the early years of the heraldic eagle, because of the number of stars on the reverse, is probably one of the rarest United States gold coins in any condition. But I left all those out because there are two that stand out above everything. One finally gave me the ability to show people what I had told them throughout the years. One I owned, one I never owned. The one that I owned is the 1808 quarter eagle. It was the Parmalee coin. And when you look in that little book in 1962, you'll see that they mention that it went Virgil Brand, and then they talk about Colonel Green, and then they talk about Dr. Judd. The coin was unbelievable. And a dealer from Denver, Colorado, Dan Brown, tried to see if he could talk me into getting my father to buy it, since I wasn't old enough to have enough money to buy it, even though Abe Kosoff wanted the ridiculous sum of $4,000 for the 1808 quarter eagle. That would be the one that sold for $2,330,000 a couple of weeks ago. I didn't have the money, and I wasn't going to ask my father to do it. So we jumped to 1972 at the A&A in New Orleans, and I got offered the coin again. This time, though, it was really high. It was $14,000. And I was in law school, about to graduate from law school, and once again I said, you know, I'm probably going to come to regret this. But the third time, instead of striking out, I bought the coin from Dr. Herbert Ketterman, who also had a great eye for high quality. And I told people for years, after Stax sold the collection, and you know, you didn't have the kind of photographs and the kind of visuals that you have today, I said, this is simply a stand-apart coin. And they said, what's the grade? I said, I'll tell you what, you get a number, anything you want. You take the next best one, and it's 4 points better. You can call the next best one a 3 if you like, it's a 7. You can call it a 61, it's a 65, but it's 4 points better than whatever's in second place. And that's my favorite quarter eagle, but the reason I say it's a tie is Harry Bass owns a 1796 no stars quarter eagle. It's the Philip Ward coin. It's the coin that I always wanted, and I never owned a 96 no stars, because even though I looked at the Garrett piece that, once again, is Poe collection, is, I believe, uncirculated. It was cataloged as AU. I really would call it an uncirculated coin, but I'd seen the Ward coin. And once you've seen one, you just simply cannot look at the other one and go, yeah, that's fine, I'll take that instead. Harry Bass talked about the Ward coin for years. He knew who had it. A gentleman named Leland Rogers owned it at one time, and then later it went to their 1796 collection, Whitney, and Harry ends up where I guess one of these days it'll probably be for sale. I predict it brings a lot of money when it comes through. All right, so we'll jump to the threes. The threes are tempting because you've got one great rarity with the 1870S, and you've got some pieces that aren't as well known but are kind of interesting. You've got the proofs from 54 and 55, and the 55 proof is actually much rarer than the 54. So it had a better story. I sat behind Bass when Stax sold what was a small selected group of pieces from Johns Hopkins, Garrett. And so in it was an 1855 proof 3. But since I collected first years of variety, I knew a lot more about that than any of the other dates. But Harry, who collected the die varieties, also knew what I knew, and that is that the only sale that was ever recorded for 55 proof, the coin was withdrawn. So there was no record at that time of a 55 proof 3 ever selling. So Harry's in front bidding. I'm behind Harry bidding. Brownlee realizes I'm bidding against Harry. Harry looks back at me, he says, what in the hell are you doing? He says, I'm going to buy this. He says, I've got to buy this. And I looked back and I said, well, then you should bid. He says, no. He says, look, he says, shut up and I will give you an 1855 $3 gold piece. So many years earlier, Harry told me a story. The difference between people was either they were sheep or sheep herders. So I looked back at, I loved Harry Bass. I looked back, I said, I'm still going to bid. He says, why? I said, because the sheep are pissed. So Harry, instead of being mad, busts out laughing. So Harry starts laughing. So I bid again, of course. Harry looks back and he says, I have a 55-3 that you would really rather have than this one because you collect uncirculated ones. So I quit bidding. I forgot about it for months, and I get this package. Package comes, and I open the package up, and in it is a letter. It's not a letter from Harry Bass. It's a letter from B. Max Mill. It is to a collector whose name I've long forgotten. It says, I know you were putting together a set of proofs. We cannot locate a 55, but this one is fully proof-like and remarkable and looks remarkably like one, and I think you'll see from the condition that you'll be satisfied with it. I think it's the withdrawn coin, but I'll never know, because it was a gem proof-like 1855, and it stayed in my collection until the collection was sold. However, he and I have a 3 that trumps all of them. Dan Ruther, who's of course an expert on gold coins and apparently didn't know anything at the time, Dan Ruther and I, being incredibly stupid, looked at an 1855 proof $3 gold piece that had an S on the back. And we looked at it and went, that's a proof. So we talked to David Akers, who goes, wow, look at that. He says, if you never turned it over, you would know that is a gem proof. And I'm going to use it as my example, and it is my favorite because it represents the importance of the grading services. Akers writes it up as a proof. Dan Ruther and I convinced it's a proof. There's a 55S half, there's a 55S quarter. Nobody would agree with us that it was actually a proof. We couldn't convince anybody but ourselves. And the coin carried its own credentials, which is one Akers was talking about. So we end up putting it back in an auction, in an apostrophe auction, where it sold for a little more than we paid for it. It was like $40,000, and we bought it for $30-something thousand plus a 1914 S5. So anyway, we said, well, I liked it, and you liked it, but no one agrees with us. Then it got graded. And after it got graded, you see, there was no grading service to go to, so I can't fuss at anybody that has a grading service. They didn't come into existence fully yet. Then it sold, and a few years after that, it sold for $1.3 million. Dan Ruther and I have been pissed ever since, and we simply want to let you know our motto's always been, where was NGC when you needed them? That's pretty much the way we feel about the entire thing. That's the 3. The 4s, I was going to tell you a story about Lester Merkin, whose office used to be at 65 East 56th Street, and who showed me some remarkable things. And I was going to tell you about the most amazing thing I'd ever seen that you never see again, except I was walking around this morning and I saw it again. It wasn't the same set. But Lester showed me one afternoon. He said, look at this. He says, this is just here. The gentleman's going out of town. I'm just keeping the coins here in the safe. It was a set of gold and gilt and aluminum 4s, 12 pieces, gold and the gilt and the aluminum. An impossible set to put together except for the one that's on exhibit here. And when I looked at Simpson's set, I went, that's really not as good a story as I had before this showed up. The best 4, I'm not going to tell you what the best 4 is because probably one of you owns the other one. So I've decided to skip that illusion completely. I will make this observation. I've never seen the most common one, the 79 flowing hair, in a better grade than coiled hair pieces. It's supposed to be so common, and it obviously is in mintage, but I've never seen a piece that in its grading matched up to the best of the very rare coiled hair pieces. And if you were collecting just extraordinary high numbers on a grading scale, I think you'd have an easier time putting the other 3 together than you would what's supposed to be the easiest coin.
If you like this video, we're sure you'll love these 3 videos. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. CoinWeek is the #1 source online for all things numismatic. Visit www.coinweek.com to take your hobby to the next level.